Back in my day, I was born in 1933 at the tail end of the Great Depression. The next 8 years was a slow recovery time. The economy finally was stimulated and forced to production when in 1941 we were attacked by Japan and entered World War II. Everybody had a job then. Even the women were called upon to do work in factories for the war effort. During those years of my youth, everything we did was with very little money. Entertainment and farm work was done with very little automatic equipment. In those days, running a farm was laborious, and without a lot of machines, it was time-consuming. So much of what was done by hand. For example, when we shelled corn, the cobs were saved to be used for burning in a kitchen stove. The sheller would dump them out onto a cob rack, a flatbed wagon with sideboards 2 or 3 feet high. The cobs were stored in the cob shed. They got there by a couple of men shoveling them in through a flip-down door across the front of the cob shed. The opening was 4 or 5 feet above their heads, and they scooped all the cobs in by hand. Today it takes a lot of money, but there is a machine for everything, or a system for most everything. When we wanted oats in the grain bin or in the milk barn for feed, we scooped it in with a shovel by hand. Now they have an auger run with a motor to move the grain. Back in my day, we milked 10 to 12 cows every morning and night by hand, and carried the 5 or 6 buckets of milk to the basement of the house by hand. There we separated the cream from the milk, turning the separator by hand. We cleaned the manure out of the barn from behind the cows with a pitchfork by hand. Now the cows are milked by an electric milking machine. The milk is run from the cow through the tubes to a large cooling tank. Instead of walking down the walkway in front of the cows with grain by the buckets full, by hand, they now have automatic feeders from the bin to the cow feeders. They even can measure different amounts for different cows along the way. The cream we took off the milk even supplied a grocery store in town and had plenty to ourselves to eat. It was rich and good. Cream on fresh cherries, picked by hand, strawberries picked by hand, fresh peaches cut up with sugar, sprinkled on any and all of them was cream. Their leftover cream was saved in a 5-gallon milk can in the cool basement until there was enough to churn butter. The butter churn was turned by hand. From the time I could turn the handle on the tumbling churn, it seemed I was a designated churner. Everyone else was older and could be doing other tasks. Now, of course, you don't think about it, but I'm sure butter is churned mechanically with electricity. Weeds and fence rows between the fields were cut by hand with a scythe. In addition to the animals, we had to feed ourselves. That meant a large garden. We raised most everything we could eat. After it was plowed, we smoothed the ground for a seed bed by hand using a hoe and rake. We plant certain vegetables in rows, and some we sprinkle the seed, like in a lettuce bed. It was all done by hand, weeded and hoed by hand. With 11 children plus mom and dad, it took a lot of gardening, a lot of work, and a lot of time. We were busy and didn't need smartphones, movies, or Facebook to fill our time. The harvesting of each, as it became available, took a lot of picking, digging, washing, cutting, and chopping, then canning and quart, but mostly half-gallon canning jars. Hundreds of jars carried down the steps to the cellar for use when needed. As a child, in winter, I played on the floor with one small metal truck. As I grew, puzzles and family, board games, Monopoly, checkers, Chinese checkers. When I was old enough, we played cards, a lot of cards, in the evenings and on Sunday afternoon. With a sister and a couple brothers older and still at home, it was easy to get 4 together to play euchre. If there was only 3, Mom would put down her crocheting and sit in. In the summer, as my brothers Kenny and I grew older, we played a lot of catch and softball, then hit fly balls out to each other hours at a time. It was good practice for judging fly balls, and when we played Junior Legion baseball and later with several softball teams, we thought we had a great life. When I was growing up, we even had a telephone at our house, hanging on the wall in the dining room just inside the door from the kitchen. We very seldom talked on it. There were 6 or 8 neighbors all connected on the same line. Only one could use the phone at a time. If you picked up your receiver and someone was on the line, you could hear the conversation. You stayed off as much as possible to allow others to use it for emergencies or business. We used it only for those purposes, emergency and urgency, arranging farm work like corn shelling or bundle pitching when thrashing oats. Back in my day, our entertainment was generated at home, and work was aplenty. It kept us out of trouble. Though a lot was done by hand, it was a good life. Bernie Stremlaw. Early memories, before age 6. When I was age 3, my grandfather was living with us on the farm. This was during the last 6 months of his life. He would rise in the morning later than the rest of the family and miss our big breakfast, with the kids getting off to school and the boys that were still at home doing the farming. He would sit at the table at the far end of the kitchen so he wouldn't interfere with my mother's work area. There was a bench on that end of the table under the east window. My next older brother, Kenny, and I would sit one on each side of him, and he would make for each of us a quarter of a sandwich of homemade summer sausage on Mother's homemade bread, and we would eat it right there beside him. As I remember, it was always made with nothing on it but butter, no condiments whatsoever. It was relished just as it was. Now I look up the death of my grandfather and see May 20, 1936. I turned 3 on July 4th of that year. At that time, in our part of the country, there was a Watkins man that called on farmers right at their house. I know my mom wasn't a big buyer, but I remember she bought her vanilla and probably some other things from the Watkins man. During this same time, there was also a peddler who came around selling clothing. I was so young I don't know if it was all farm-type clothing or if he also carried women's clothes. I do know that is when my mother obtained the unionalls that my brother and I wore. They were one piece. You step into the legs and then put your arms in the sleeves and button up the front. There were also a couple buttons on the corners of the rear flap, so you could go to the toilet and not have to take them off. I remember the effort it took to button those up. It was a big challenge for me. We had 2 pair each, one to wear while the other was in the wash or laundry. I know I had only 2 because one day I was outside meandering the chicken coop and saw some eggs. I thought I would surprise Mom and bring her some eggs. I had more than I could carry in my hands, so I put 1 or 2 in my front pants pocket. When I was going up the steps to the back porch, I heard this crunch, and when I lifted my leg. Gooey egg was saturating my pocket and then down the leg. Mother said I had to take my unionalls off, but I didn't have another clean pair. She solved that. She brought out my older sister's dresses and put one on me. I just about died. It was humiliation beyond explanation. I did live through it, which is proof that humiliation does not kill. Bernie Stremlaw. Memories beyond age 6. My parents raised 9 boys and 2 girls on a farm near Mendota in north central Illinois. 6 of the older children did not attend high school, so recreation, sports, entertainment was not in their life from that source. As I grew up, I have thoughts of what my parents went through and how they dealt with energy of all those boys. I remember 2 activities that were performed by my brother Kenny and me, the last 2 of the family. The age I don't remember, but I was old enough to know what basketball was. I'm guessing 7, 8, 10 years old. The room beside the parlor was used as a dining room at this time. The table was shoved all the way to one side. Between the 2 rooms was a double-wide sliding door. It made for a nice wide archway. In the center of the dining room, hanging from the ceiling by 3 chains, was a chandelier. It was a circular 12-inch bronze dish with 3 globes hanging down with light bulbs in them. We used it as our basket. We had an old sponge rubber ball, 3-4 inches in diameter, and we would start in the parlor, come through the doorway dribbling it like a basketball, and shoot it up into the fixture. When we made a basket, we got the ball out by getting a chair from the side of the room, stepping up, tipping the fixture, and dumping out the ball. Then the other person would try. We kept score of how many baskets each of us made. Now I look back and wonder how my mother put up with it. However, it did burn off energy on a rainy or wintry day when we were not outside. The Christmas we received roller skates was a surprise and a disappointment. The clamp-on style skates were exciting, but where does a farm kid roller skate? The only concrete sidewalk we had was from the back door out to the well pump, which was about 12 or 15 feet. Besides, it's winter. I figure our dad must have had something in mind when he bought the skates, because the next day or so, he went to the parlor, which was not used in our everyday life, only when some unusual family or guests came and more space was needed. I remember that happening only once in my lifetime. The parlor had an old thin wool-woven carpet on the floor, and Dad rolled it up, left it against the outside wall. We skated around and around in the parlor. It was our roller rink. We had a fun memory. I think my father's philosophy was a lot like mine. If you don't use it, what good is it? That parlor was very used. These are a couple things I remember that probably helped my parents get through their 9 boys and maintain their sanity. And we had lots of fun growing up. Bernie Stremlaw. The Hemp Turner. After the Japanese attacked the U.S. by bombing Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, they then attacked and took over the strategic Philippine Islands, which were the main source of the plant hemp, which was used to make rope. We had to rebuild and expand our Navy. Each ship required miles of rope in different sizes. The U.S. farmer was called upon to raise hemp to fill the need. We planted 20 acres of hemp on our farm. When the hemp matured and was cut, it had to dry in the sun so it could be shattered at the factory to remove the pulp inside and leave the strong, stringy outside fiber, which was used for rope. Up to this time, in the Philippines, they turned the hemp over to allow the sun to do its work on both sides by using long poles like window poles, window washers. To slide under the hemp 4 or 6 feet at a time, lift and flip it over. This was very labor-intensive. America could do better. Invent a machine to do it. Both my mother and father were born in No, 1892. Dad in March, Mom in October. They were 8 years old in 1900, the year of the field trial of the airplane at Kitty Hawk. It was airborne for 120 feet. It needed corrections and refinement. In 1903, it made the first motorized lift off the ground. I was born in 1933. I was 10 years old in 1943 when in a field of my Uncle Leo's farm across the road from ours was the first field trial of the hemp turner. This was invented by Black Brothers Manufacturing Company in Mendota, Illinois. For this test, I was there. Like the airplane, it required some corrections and refinements. I wasn't at the next trial, which proved successful. It was that day in the field of my uncle's farm that I had an aha moment in my life. At age 10, I saw the problem with the hemp turner that the adults were trying to correct. As I understood what they were talking about doing, I saw and realized that it wouldn't work. Of course, when I begged my mother to let me go out to the field with my dad and older brothers, and she severely cautioned me to keep my mouth shut and stay out of the way. So what I saw, I kept to myself. Turning the link chain around to move the metal cleat welded to the side of the link would not match when on the other side, but I kept my mouth shut. Maybe I wasn't seeing what they were talking about. Smarter people, and they understood. I am sure they were all thinking how to remove the sprocket and shaft to get the chain off and turn it around. Sure enough, when they got to the point of reinstalling, they found it didn't match up with the slots in the metal chute that was used to carry the hemp up onto the large circular turntable, the radius of which had to be enough to handle the 10-foot stalks. Turning of the large cylinder table would drop the hemp on the other side and it would be turned over. What was the underside would now be on top. Son, do your work. I was the youngest in my family of 11 children. 9 of us were boys. I always was the slowest, weakest, and dumbest. Everyone could do anything better than I. That day I realized I had a mind that could think. I saw something that all of those older men missed, even the factory people who were out there with the machine. I was right. What a revelation that was to me. I never did tell anyone because I didn't want to get in trouble then for not saying anything. From the field test of flight at Kitty Hawk to the field test in the hemp field, it was 43 years. I feel that I participated in the same kind of hope, expectation, and tension that the Wright brothers must have when Mom and Dad were about age 10. But then, I was 10, I was there, and it was more special. It was enlightening and memorable. It was the day I realized I'm not so dumb after all. Bernie Stremlau. Landing upside down. After World War II ended in 1945, our country was able to get back into production of needed domestic items instead of war necessities. What a relief and time of celebration. There was so much our country was behind on because of steel and aluminum was needed for the war effort. All junk iron was reprocessed, recycled. Do you remember when we grade school kids even saved the aluminum foil from gum wrappers and cigarette packs? During the 4 or 5 years of the war, American homes, farms, and much manufacturing suffered. There was a shortage of new washing machines, farm machinery, and automobiles. After the war in 1946, many of our factories got back to making normal consumer items. The first new thing after the war that our family procured was a new Ford tractor. Up until that time, I never knew the brand name Ford ever existed on farm machinery. We had an old F-20 Farmall International. Our neighbor up the road had John Deere. Some of my grade school mates had Case. There was always Minneapolis Moline, and then a little later Oliver made it to our country. It was always an ongoing argument about which was better, red, green, or orange. Ford was never in the picture, but now we had one, and it was dull gray. I think it was a little cheaper than major brand, and although it had a wide front end, it was a self-starter, fenders, lights, and a 3-point hydraulic hitch for the drawbar and mounted equipment. We had a 2-bottom plow with it, a cultivator for row crop, corn and soybeans. It was so wonderful as a light utility tractor on the farm, easy to start and easy to drive, with a steering wheel more like a flat on a car, when a clutch easy to reach by a kid. The F-20, you had to crank to start, and it had a clutch I couldn't even push in. The Ford was easy to drive and used for all the light work, pulling wagons, side raking, and even pulling the hay mower, converted from a horse-drawn tongue to a tractor hitch. I think the first important work I did with it was to drive it on the hay rope, pulling the fork full of hay up into the barn. We had a signaler like my sister who sat in the open hay mow door over outside to signal when the men in the barn would yell to trip the fork of hay at the spot they wanted. Then the driver had to stop and back up to the starting point while the guy who was sticking the fork pulled the empty fork back out of the barn to stick it in the hay for another forkful. Then a wave to go ahead again. The Ford tractor was used also to haul loads of corn home to the farm place, where it was unloaded into the elevator and stored in the corn crib. It was a great little tractor for that kind of work. That fall, when I was 12, 3 of my married older brothers were farming their own rented land. They shared equipment, so each did not have to buy a full line of machinery. One owned the corn picker, one owned the combine, one the hay baler, etc. It was almost necessary to have 2 people for those big harvest times to take the wagon loads home and unload them in the granary or corn crib. That way, they never had to hire somebody to work for them. They just exchanged work. When they finished picking corn at one place, they would move the picker and wagons to the next farm. One of those times after school in the evening, about dusk, they were moving the equipment to the next farm, approximately 4 miles away. I was helping, driving the Ford tractor with a couple Flarbox wagons behind, following an older brother driving the picker with one wagon. On the way, we had to cross a small creek. Approaching the bridge on the gravel road high on the hill, the road had grown to be quite wide, so traffic could stay to one side because you couldn't see over the hill if traffic was coming. Just past the crest of the hill, the road narrowed to the one-lane bridge ahead. I was distracted watching the farmer across the road coming out of his barn. When I turned back to see straight ahead, I was heading for the 2-foot-high cement abutment of the bridge. I am up on both brakes and the clutch, the wheels sliding on the gravel, with those 2 wagons, though empty, pushing me down that hill, and I straddle that abutment. The tractor gets hung up and rolls over into the creek bed. Since I was standing on the brakes, there was nothing that caught my clothing and I jumped off into the creek. I rolled, looked up, and see the rear wheel of the tractor coming down directly toward my face. I quickly rolled a couple more times, and the wheel missed me. The farmer across the road came running down. Time My brother also came back when he saw my lights shining up into the air and no longer behind him. The new Ford tractor and I took to the air, did a half roll, and landed upside down. I was unhurt, but oh, the embarrassment, guilt, and shock. Then, when I realized I was still alive, relief. Bernie Stremlaw.